Who should you start? Who should you sit in week 3 of the 2024 fantasy football season? What's going on, fantasy freaks and football fans? It's Mitch here, back with another Owner's Box fantasy football video. And in this video, my 4 starts, my 4 sits at every position from quarterback through tight end. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly starts and sits here on Owner's Box Fantasy. And let me know in the comments any lineup questions that you may have. Any at all. Who should you start at wide receiver? The flex spots, defensive matchups. Let me know in the comments section below. And let's get started with the quarterback position. Joe Burrow is about to have a huge week in week number 3. I think Joe Burrow is going to have his best game by far of the 2024 fantasy season so far. He plays the Washington Commanders defense, a defense that is dead last against the quarterback position so far this season. Baker Mayfield went off in week number 1, and even Daniel Jones had a little bit of success. Even Daniel Jones against the Commanders. I think Joe Burrow is going to have a huge night. It's a Monday night, primetime affair in the jungle. T. Higgins might be back. Jamar Chase is motivated and angry. And Burrow looked closer to himself against the Chiefs. Plus, they're 0-2, so they're in a desperate spot. Start Joe Burrow big time in week 3. Derek Carr versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Carr is playing the Eagles defense that is 21st against quarterbacks so far this year through 2 games. Kirk Cousins actually looked pretty good on Monday night, especially coming from behind in that fourth quarter. Derek Carr has not had to attempt many passes to be successful in fantasy so far. He's lit it up against the Panthers and the Cowboys. 2 defenses. Some people thought the Cowboys would be fantastic. Some people thought the Panthers would be terrible, but he's been tested on both ends of the spectrum. I feel if this game is more competitive and high scoring and the Eagles are moving the ball on the Saints a bit better than the Cowboys or the Panthers, Carr will actually have to throw more. But I still feel like the efficiency against a defense that I'm not a huge fan of, I think that efficiency will be high. So if you picked up Derek Carr this week, I think he's definitely worth a look. Brock Purdy versus the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams defense is not very good. And yeah, I do think the Niners should be able to run the ball on the Rams, but I think Purdy should have success against a secondary that's without Darius Williams, a pass rush that isn't overly fantastic. I think Brandon Ayuk is really looking to have his best game of the season this week against a thin cornerback group. And I just feel Shanahan always has a great game plan against the Rams. He owns the Rams. He owns McVay. It's a revenge spot in terms of the Niners are trying to get back on track, back in the win column after a slump game against the Vikings. So I think they'll be motivated. Purdy coming off a bad game. Expect him to have a good game in week 3. Jared Goff versus the Arizona Cardinals. This is expected to be one of the highest scoring games of the week. Could be into the 50s. It's in a great condition dome once again for Jared Goff. Arizona is not a very good defense, number 29 against quarterbacks so far this year. I do think the Lions, just like the Niners, will be able to run the ball, but I think Goff, Purdy, these quarterbacks are always better when they have a running game, when they can work play action, when they can attack the middle of the field. With Kyler Murray doing his magician road runner act on the other side, Jared Goff is going to have to match him and throw the football. I think Goff could have a 2-3 touchdown day here, maybe upwards of 300 yards. If the Cardinals are aggressive, if they try to pack the box and force Goff to throw, he could hit big plays to his speedster, Jamison Williams. If they blitz, he's going to go hot to Laporta or St. Brown or maybe Gibbs out of the backfield. This Lions offense will move the ball and will score points against an underwhelming Cardinals defense. My quarterback sits Matthew Stafford on the other side of Brock Purdy versus the 49ers. Stafford simply just doesn't have anything around him. I love Matthew Stafford. He's a great quarterback. He's an all-timer, but he has no offensive line. Now he's playing Javon Hargrave, Nick Bosa, and easily the best pass rush he's faced all year. On top of that, it's a Niners team that's angry. Like I mentioned already, they're coming off a loss. They rarely lose. They want to get back on track. Los Angeles, yes, they're at home, but Niners fans pack that house each and every meeting, and the Rams, McVay has never been great against this Niners defense. On top of that, Stafford doesn't have Puka or Cup, so nothing to rely on at wide receiver. This is definitely a sit for me, just no upside. Kirk Cousins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have not been great against quarterbacks so far. They've been 31st against quarterbacks, but this isn't a great matchup for Cousins in my opinion. The Chiefs do have great corners, do have a very solid secondary, and play sticky in coverage. Spags is aggressive and will blitz a quarterback that can't really move. I think Atlanta's best approach offensively is to run a lot. The Chiefs are weak against the run, and I think that Bijan will be able to have a big day. Maybe Cousins puts a touchdown up or two. Maybe they're trailing against the Chiefs and they have to throw back into this game. So maybe he's not the absolute worst start in the world, but I just don't see a lot of upside against one of the best defenses in football, a very good defensive coordinator that's going to heat up Cousins in unique ways and have him moving off his spot, which he's definitely not comfortable with right now due to the Achilles. So I would not start Cousins despite a pretty good game last week. Trevor Lawrence versus the Buffalo Bills. The Bills have been a really good, impressive defense, especially over the last 6 quarters. They struggled a little bit in the first half against the Cardinals, which is kind of deflating their numbers, but they're number 12 against quarterbacks so far. Lawrence has just not been impressive, and this is as much about the Bills secondary and the Bills pass rush as it is about Jacksonville. Jacksonville's offensive line is terrible. They can't block. They're going on a Monday night primetime game against the hostile Buffalo Mafia crowd, and they're taking on Gregory Rousseau, Von Miller, who's rejuvenated, Ed Oliver, and they're having to block those boys. I just don't see how Lawrence is successful after really struggling against Cleveland and Miami in weeks 1 and 2. Justin Herbert versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, for my money, is the best defense in football. They currently rank number 2 against quarterbacks. Herbert has no receivers to really threaten the Steelers, and this is by far the best defense and team he's actually played. He's also playing on the road with a bummed ankle. I just don't love Herbert here. He's not going to have a lot of attempts in a defensive game. He's just going to be looking to control the game, looking to play conservative, no turnovers, run the football, right? That's how Harbaugh wants this Charger team to play, and there's more incentive to do that when you're facing TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. The amount of plays those guys can make when you drop back 30 times, there's just too many chances for them to change the game, so it's going to be a run-heavy script. On top of that, Justin Fields isn't scoring a lot of points on the other side. My running back starts. The Cleveland running backs in general. Start Ford, start Foreman if you picked him up. I think Foreman could be a sneaky start. He's not like a top 24 player or anything, but as a deeper flex or even an RB2 if you're desperate, I don't mind either one because either one could lead this team in rushing in a given week. I was impressed with Foreman last week, and I think Ford definitely has a solid floor. Now, that being said, they play a really weak run defense. The Giants rank number 26 against running backs so far. They let Brian Robinson and an underwhelming Commanders offensive line jam the ball straight down their throats. They can't stop the run to save their lives. So I really feel like Foreman and Ford, both of them could be touchdown players this week. Both of them could be 50-plus rushing yards, 1 or 2 receptions each. I think they're both solid plays this week, especially with Cleveland's defense probably securing their end of things against Daniel Jones. They're going to be running the ball a lot and playing from ahead. So I really like this matchup. Rashad White against the Denver Broncos. Rashad White was an absolute bum last week against the Detroit Lions, and he probably lost you your week, but it's a bounce back spot against Denver at home. Rashad White has been pretty good, over the last year and a half of fantasy football. And I feel like against Denver, a team that wasn't very good against the run last year, dealing with some injuries with John Franklin Myers and concussion protocol, Browning on the edge, potentially missing this game. The Tampa Bay Bucks overall wanting to run the ball because their defense is probably, not going to be at 100% with Vita Vea out and then Kalijah Cansey out and Antoine Winfield out. They probably want to control this game. White also could be factored in as a receiver out of the backfield. We saw Kenneth Walker in week 1 have a huge day against the Broncos. Pittsburgh, not as much, but I feel like White could be one that scores 1-2 touchdowns. This is definitely a spot where the Bucks could rather blow the Broncos out and they score 30 and White scores 2 touchdowns, or they're, playing in a tight contest where White's going to have to catch the football. So I like him either way. DeAndre Swift versus the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have the worst run defense for my money in the NFL. They are the worst in terms of rushing yards allowed by like 70 plus yards, even compared to Carolina. They're that bad. They're number 24 in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. DeAndre Swift, if you're ever going to start him for the rest of the year, this is the spot. If the Bears can't run the ball against the Colts, they have serious problems. Swift has been featured as an every down back. He just has not had great matchups against Houston or Tennessee, two really good run defenses with stout front sevens and solid run defense schemes. He plays the Colts, who haven't shown they can stop the run, even against a quarterback like Malik Willis when they're selling out to stop the run. Now they got to deal with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, potentially Keenan Allen, Caleb Williams, that potential dynamic in a dome. So they're worried about their secondary. They're going to give up and concede the run a little bit to a team that hasn't proven they can run it. So Swift could hit some big plays in this game. Zamir White versus the Carolina Panthers. Carolina's number 30 against running back so far. Again, White has struggled so far. He is the starter with the Raiders. He is the primary first and second down ball carrier in a game where the Raiders are rarely favored by 5 points. They're at home. They'll be ahead. They'll run the ball. Last week, they played the Ravens. They weren't ahead. They were down. They had to throw the ball. That was great for Bowers. That was great for Adams. But in a game where they should be ahead for a majority, they're going to want to run it. They're going to want to smash it down Carolina's throat, and Carolina has not been good against the run the last 2 years, so I think Zamir White could have by far the best outing so far of his season. Now, my running back sits. Ezekiel Elliott against the Ravens. The Ravens have been one of the best run defenses in football that I've seen on tape. The Ravens have big people in their front seven. It's really difficult to push them around and move the ball on the ground. They're number 6 against running backs. They've got big guys like Michael Pierce and Justin Madubuike. And the Cowboys' run offense has looked terrible, putrid. Couldn't run the ball against Cleveland. Couldn't run the ball because of game state against the Saints. I feel like they won't really be able to run the ball against the Ravens because Lamar, Derrick Henry, they'll be running the ball against the Cowboys, keeping Dallas off balance. Dallas will probably have to throw the football. You might see more Rico Dowdle this week than expected because he was factoring in more in week 2. Zeke doesn't feel like a great play moving forward, especially not in this matchup against a really good run defense. Aaron Jones versus the Texans. They are number 3 against running back so far this year. Aaron Jones looks decent. He looks spotty like the electric player that he was in Green Bay. Didn't do so well against San Francisco. Actually, Ty Chandler outperformed him. Could that lead Ty Chandler to getting more touches? Even with Ty Chandler perhaps getting more touches, this isn't a great matchup for either Viking running back, as the Texans have been very good against the run the last 2 years. They were actually the best defense in football for a majority of last year in success rate on the ground. This year, they've shown that they could shut down Chicago and also do a good job against Jonathan Taylor. So I would sit Aaron Jones. Devin Singletary versus Cleveland. Number 11 versus running backs are the Browns. I think that the Browns will be running the ball on the Giants, getting ahead. I think that means Singletary will not be running the ball too much. I don't see a lot of points being scored, so I don't think a touchdown is in play for Singletary. The ceiling is just not very high with this offensive line facing Myles Garrett and company in Cleveland. Then we've got Kyren Williams versus San Francisco. This is like my shocking sit of the week because Kyren is counted on as an every week start. This is the play where if you have an alternative, an option that's a start, or a guy that I really like this week, I might go over Kyren because Kyren is really feeling like a guy that's simply only going to be touchdown based right now because the offense is absolutely in shambles on the offensive line. They can't open up holes. He has nowhere to run. He can't really cut back anywhere. And he's facing a Niners defense that has a dominant edge at the defensive front in this game. So Kyren, unless he's catching the ball a little bit more than we've seen in the first 2 weeks, which he hasn't been catching the ball, then it's not going to be a great play. It's probably going to be one of the worst weeks to start Kyren in the NFL season this year. My wide receiver starts Stephon Diggs in a bounce back spot against the Vikings and a revenge spot. They've been number 18 against wide receivers. I think Stephon Gilmore will primarily be shadowing Nico Collins, and Gilmore is still good at football. Nico should still have a good day, but with Nico beat up as well, we see that he's a little bit injured. Diggs should get more targets, especially against a Brian Flores defense that's going to be blitz happy, that's going to be very dynamic in their coverages. Stroud's going to want to go to his short underneath outlet very quickly, which is Diggs. He operates in that short area of the field. He was also a dangerous red zone threat in week 1, so he could score a touchdown and probably could have 7 or 8 catches in this game. I wouldn't be too shocked by that. Jackson Smith and Jigba, JSN versus Miami. Miami number 6 first wide receivers, which is pretty impressive, but I was overly actually just really impressed with JSN last week against Marcus Jones and the New England Patriots. I thought he had the best game I've ever seen him play in the NFL. I think he'll carry that momentum into a game at home in Seattle. I think they want to continue to feature him out of the slot, and Miami has not had great slot coverage over the last couple of years. I don't love their corners as much as others. I think that their definite biggest advantage is that slot spot. If Ramsey's covering Metcalf on one side, that might persuade Geno to attack the middle of the field with JSN. So I like him in this game, especially if Miami is sneakily better on offense with Skylar Thompson than we think. Then we have T. Higgins against the Commanders. If T. Higgins is playing, he belongs in your lineup. I would almost look to have T. Higgins in my lineup and maybe pivot towards a Bill, a Jag, maybe Yossi Voss, potentially, if T. Higgins can't play on Monday night, because there's 2 games on Monday night, so it gives you more alternatives for playing T. Higgins this week. I think he will play. Washington's terrible against the pass. They're number 7 in terms of the worst team against wide receivers. I feel like Higgins could have a bunch of splash plays, could score 1 or 2 touchdowns. We've seen how much teams have been doubling Jamar Chase and trying to take him out of games. You can't do that as much when T. Higgins is out there, but if teams are going to do that, then T. Higgins is going to absolutely feast. So I think he's motivated, hungry to get on the field, and I think Burrow is hungry to get him the ball. So with this matchup, the Commanders can't cover a soul. I think Higgins is a great play. Brandon Ayuk against the Rams. I brought him up earlier. The Rams, number 24 versus wide receivers. Ayuk could have a bunch of splash plays in this game, being that there's no man-to-man cover man for the Rams that can take him out. I think Ayuk has been slow as a starter this year because he's probably out of shape coming off of that contract extension and holding out. But I think 2 games in, he's probably got his feet under him. He's probably motivated because Debo went down, so he needs to step up. Kyle's probably really going after the game plan and trying to get different ways to manufacture him touches in the screen game, as a runner, also just down the field, trying to get Ayuk going. And Purdy has always relied on Ayuk for the big plays in the offense. So I think Ayuk will get it going against the Rams and could have a huge day. Wide receiver sits. Michael Pittman Jr. against Chicago. Jalen Johnson, one of the best corners in the league. They're number 13 against wide receivers. Michael Pittman has not been good all season. Anthony Richardson, he can't hit water if he fell out of a boat. He's been absolutely terrible. 50% completion percentage or worse in both games, which is putrid. Now, obviously, great setting in the dome, but Chicago's defense been pretty darn good. They were great against Calvin Ridley. They only really gave up and conceded yards against Nico Collins, but not to Diggs or to Tank Dell. So I think Pittman's going to struggle against this defense. Quentin Johnston against Pittsburgh. He's had a nice couple of weeks here with Los Angeles, but I don't see him having success against Joey Porter Jr., which will likely be the matchup because it's, length versus length, height versus height. That is the matchup for Joey Porter. And yeah, Pittsburgh's pretty good against wide receivers. Number 8 against wide receivers. Terry McLaurin is facing Cincinnati. Cincinnati, number 7 against wide receivers so far. Cincinnati has been pretty good in terms of limiting wide receivers so far this year. I mean, obviously, New England doesn't really have any wide receiver targets to feature, but then Kansas City, Rashee Rice, after a huge week 1, was very quiet in week 2. Xavier Worthy basically did nothing. Cam Taylor-Britt is extremely underrated, and McLaurin has been struggling a lot so far. He has been featured as an X receiver only. They're not really moving him around. He's basically running as a decoy out there. It's just not been an attractive fantasy play. And then Green Bay wide receivers versus Tennessee. They're number 4 versus wide receivers. No surprise, as Tennessee has one of the best cornerback groups in football, led by L'Jarius Sneed. With Malik Willis at quarterback, I brought this up last week. There's just no allure. There's just no way, shape, or form why I would be starting the Green Bay receivers, especially not Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs, because those are the downfield threats. Maybe you sneak in Reed to your lineup because there's manufactured touches and short receptions that he could have. Wicks actually scored a touchdown, which even depleted the receivers even more. But, with L'Jarius Sneed and company out there, I don't think Tennessee, the defense that's allowing the least amount of yards through 2 weeks, is really going to allow any of these receivers to torch them. And then my tight end starts. We're not doing tight end sits because they're irrelevant, like no one cares. Hunter Henry versus the New York Jets. Number 15 versus tight ends, but Hunter Henry was the featured weapon of the Patriots offense. And with the state of the tight end position right now, Hunter Henry is worth starting for sure. Being that CJ Mosley is out, that could also make the middle of the field more available. The Jets also don't have great safeties, so Henry will have a great matchup in this game. If Quincy Williams is having to match up with Ramondre Stevenson, that's going to leave a safety, or that's going to leave the third linebacker of the Jets to cover the best weapon on the Patriots, a guy that has been, basically thrown the football at will against Seattle. Jacoby Brissett does not really look down the field. He looks at the intermediate level, which is primarily where Henry works. Plus, he's one of the more likely tight ends in football to score a touchdown. That's also a fact. Kyle Pitts versus Kansas City. Kansas City's actually been the worst team against tight ends so far this year. They struggled against Mike Gesicki. They struggled against, a couple of the other Bengal tight ends who had a ton of receptions in that game. But then they also struggled mightily against Isaiah Likely. So taller, athletic, long tight ends like Kyle Pitts, Mike Gesicki, Isaiah Likely seems to be a mismatch. So I think Atlanta will attack that. If Pitts is going to get on track this year, I think it starts this week against the Chiefs, especially if the Chiefs get a lead. Pitts could get a lot of touches and a lot of targets later in this game. Noah Fant against Denver, I'm simply making him a start because he's the only weapon in Seattle that's been playing a lot that has yet to have a huge game. We saw Metcalf and JSN have a huge game against the Patriots. Lockett had a huge game in week 1. Noah Fant is that man remaining, and it's a revenge game against the Broncos. So I could see Noah Fant having some big plays here. If he even gets 3 or 4 catches for some big plays, he's athletic, ball in his hands, he can make plays, and he might even score a touchdown. So Noah Fant might be worth it in a revenge spot. And if you need a floor play, Zach Ertz, you could do worse than Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has been pretty consistent. He's a top 10 tight end in PPR so far in fantasy football. He's playing the number 14 team against tight ends in Cincinnati. And being that the Bengals, I expect a lot of points, a lot of yards from the Bengals. I expect Joe Burrow to be on track with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. I think that Zach Ertz will catch a bunch of balls in the third and fourth quarter coming from behind. Jaden Daniels trying to get back in the game. So I could see this being a high volume game for Zach Ertz against the linebackers of the Bengals. Now we're going to finish with the defense starts, beginning with Tennessee against Green Bay. I told you to pick up Tennessee this week. I love this matchup because they're playing Malik Willis. Tennessee is very good against the run, and they've got excellent corners. They're able to play man in the back end to be able to stuff the run, and they're going to get to the quarterback with Harold Landry, Jeff Simmons, and company if the Titans get a lead, which is very likely here. Then you've got the Los Angeles Chargers against Pittsburgh. A lot of people are going to start Pittsburgh against the Chargers, but I think the Chargers are also a really decent play as Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack have been playing well, and they take on one of the more underwhelming young tackle duos in football in Pittsburgh and a quarterback in Justin Fields who's known for holding on to the ball. So I think the Chargers are a really interesting start as well with strip sack potential for sure. Chicago versus Indianapolis. Anthony Richardson has been really bad so far outside of a couple big plays against Houston, and the run game of the Colts has been pretty underwhelming. The Bears have been really stout up front against the run, and I also feel they've got the corners to match up with the Colts, the athleticism at linebacker to track down Richardson in space, and this is also a revenge game, a big spot for Matt Eberflus returning home against the Colts. And Seattle versus Miami at home. Skylar Thompson with an underwhelming offensive line, Teron Armstead injured, Tyreek Hill angry, the entire Miami organization and team probably being a bit depressed after what happened to Tua. I think this could be really ugly potentially, and this is a high ceiling play for Seattle because it's Miami on the road, bad offensive line in a very loud environment where they're having to communicate all the pressures of Mike Macdonald, and Macdonald has a very good feel for the Shanahan, Mike McDaniel style of offense. So I think Macdonald gives them the edge over McDaniel, which is why Seattle is a start in the final start of the start and sits for week 3. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, Gronk spike the like. Don't forget to subscribe. It's Mitch. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week for more starts and sits. Let me know your questions in the comment section below. Deuces.